Shannon Battison is the National President of the Australian Institute of Architects, and she's a Canberra architecture practitioner, co-director of the Mill Architecture and Design. Shannon, thank you for being with us to talk about some home truths for Canberra's housing situation, how the future looks for us in 2030 as we try to unpack what kind of city we need to be in the next decade, and particularly the role that design and planning play.
Thanks for having me. It's an important topic for us all, I think.
Well, it's an important time for us to be talking, I think. We're on the verge of a new territory plan, and that could reshape the way Canberra appears as the city expands over the next decade or so. How big do you think the opportunity is before us? Why does that matter so much right now?
Look, I think it's a huge opportunity for us to say as a city what our priorities are in how we develop and how we move forward, because what we have currently is a highly prescriptive regulation about how we build new buildings. And what we have kind of come from originally, and what would be great if we could get back to, is a system that really focuses on the outcome and innovation and how we get to really good results, not necessarily specifically how tall something is or specifically how big something is, but instead what's the best result for this particular street and this particular community or this particular function.
And that's certainly the promise for the territory plan. That's what we're told is in it, and the direction that ACT planning authorities have taken. But there has been a perception for quite a long time that we've been over-regulated in this space, and the response has been, well, I've got the right number of windows in this thing, and therefore it can be approved because it fits the numbers, it fits all the parameters. What was the result of that approach from authorities? What was the consequence for how the city looks and feels?
I think one of the sad consequences is that our city has kind of developed in a way where really you could be, if you're in the new suburbs particularly, you could be in any new suburb, and not just around Australia but around the world. We've got systems that have supported really, nondescript building styles. So instead of celebrating, say, innovation or personality in our buildings, we've kind of created a system where the easiest thing to get approved is just something that kind of ticks some boxes. And so what we've got is suburbs full of really essentially the same house. And we've got areas of our inner city suburbs where we're seeing more development happen, and older buildings come down and new buildings go up, and the quality of those buildings that we're building in these suburbs really doesn't fit the aspiration of what the suburb itself, should be.
This is a really disappointing set of circumstances. Here we are in the middle of one of the world's great designed cities. This is the place where Walter Burley Griffin's vision has iterated out, but of course the city is expanding so far beyond what he could have ever envisaged as the original footprint. So what do you think that the risks are about people not paying attention to design and planning as the city grows?
Look, for me, design is really about thinking about something for a moment before we build it. And the temptation, I think, is because we're a busy city and we're growing so quickly, is to produce buildings faster rather than slowing down and thinking about what it is we're building before we build it. I think for me, the biggest risk in that is that we lose something that's really integral to what makes Canberra special. So as you said, it's one of the few truly designed cities in the world, and one of the gifts I think that Marion Marnie Griffin and Walter Burley Griffin gave us in their original designs is this really highly considered use of space, and a highly considered combination of denser areas and less dense areas, of green corridors through our suburbs, of ways to move through a suburb that didn't necessarily revolve entirely around one specific form of transport. You look at the green spaces that connect areas in suburbs, say Curtin. You can move through as a child on a bike without needing to be in the car. And as we moved further and further out as a city, we're losing those nuances, I think, that really make Canberra a special place to live, and make Canberra one of those places where it's such a fabulous place to raise children, because you can let them, navigate a suburb without them really needing to cross any main thoroughfares and things like that. And I think that our risk we're facing is that we're losing those little parts, those spaces in between the built environment, the spaces in between our houses, that not only make a city a beautiful place to live, but also make our buildings function a lot better than they currently do.
And look, you've probably led nicely to my next question, which is what has this got to do with ordinary everyday Canberrans? Because, often the response to discussions about design will be, look, okay, design's for other people. I don't care. I want a nice house in a nice street, not too far from the shops, not too far from school. I want the kids to feel comfortable. What say should you have over how I build my house? I mean, why does design matter when we're considering the city's future, both at the level you've described, the suburb planning level, but also at the level of individual buildings, people's houses?
Yeah, look, I think one of the biggest sad points for me about the way Australians consider themselves and consider their homes in particular, if we talk about homes, is that we don't really think we're worthy of good design. And that wasn't always the case. It used to be something that we all aspired to as a society, to have a really nicely designed house. And we've lost that somewhere along the way. And so we have a situation where people, if they're building a new house, speak to a builder first, and then they pick a plan that kind of best suits, I guess, their lifestyle. And what that usually means is that they fit their lifestyle into a predetermined plan by somebody else. So one of the things that I think is really special in our homes is that we can have the power to make them about us, about our family, about how we live. Our families all look really different, and instead of squeezing our families in to fit in a predetermined plan, it would be so wonderful to see more and more people actually think about what their family needed to live the life they want to live, and then going after that. And I think one of the misconceptions that has led to the system that we've got at the moment, or that kind of tradition that we've established, is that architectural fees are really expensive, and therefore we could get a bigger house if we put that money into the build instead of into the process of deciding what the house should be to start with.
So I knew you'd get there, and I know I'm poking the bear. How do you feel about big houses?
Yeah, I don't love big houses, but it's not that I don't think big houses should exist. I think houses should exist across all scales. My issue with big houses is at the moment that's all we really build. We build apartments, we build a small number of townhouses, and then we build really big houses. And when you've got suburbs that are only filled with 4-bedroom, 2 living room, double garage houses, we're just leaving whole sections of our community behind. We shouldn't have a situation where we have, say, single older women who, if they can't afford a 4-bedroom house, can't afford to buy a house. There should be other houses in our suburbs that could meet their needs, that would meet their needs, but we don't build them at the moment.
And we don't build well-designed houses for everybody, do we? We've got this sort of idea that big houses maybe are the preserve of architects, maybe the preserve of people who want to spend a lot of money on their places, but design can be very small and very simple, and I guess there's an impact that we often ignore that a small, very well-designed house can make on someone's life.
Absolutely. And I think what tends to happen is that when we build a house to fit as many different family modes as possible, it ends up being bigger. And when we look at one specific family, or if we just take time to think about what that particular block has on it beforehand, we can often build much smaller houses, which is cheaper then to build. And I think that one of the things that we do need to push away from is that feeling that architecture or good design is reserved for the elite. I think the people who need a well-designed house the most are usually the ones who can't actually afford those services, and that comes down to us as a society and a community about how we look after those people in our community who most need those spaces that will perform really well in our climate, that will support them with different modes of living should they need different levels of assistance, and that basically provide a really happy, healthy and safe place for them to call home.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes to sustainability. It goes to our sustainability as a city, because smaller houses, cheaper to build, well-designed houses, less need for air conditioning, all kinds of things, all kinds of bells and whistles don't become necessary if you design the house well in the beginning. But, to the crunch here, this is a city in a housing crisis. So what does design have to say about how we get roofs over people's heads and how we make those roofs accessible and suitable for their lives? I mean, perhaps especially at that lower end of the spectrum.
Look, I think what we're facing is a whole of community problem, and it needs a whole of community solution. So as a community, we need to be saying, look, here are some of our most vulnerable members. This is what they need out of housing. And instead of us finding the cheapest solution to providing that housing, as a community, we need to say, okay, well, we will invest in getting that housing right so that then it's cheap for them to run. One of the issues I think that we have a lot with cheaper built, more volume built housing is that it might be cheaper to build, but it's inherently more expensive to run. We still lose people in Canberra to illnesses, that are made worse by living in cold housing each year. And I just think that's an unforgivable statistic to, be aware of. And I think that what that requires is for us as a community to be prepared to pay a little bit more for those housings when we're building them, so that the people who we're actually going to care for in them aren't the ones asked to pay for that, lack of design and lack of forethought. We do have a very severe climate, but it's also one that's really easy to design well for. Simple solar passive architecture shouldn't cost you any more to build, but should save you astronomical amounts of money to actually be comfortable in, and a lot of your energy in trying to run around and kind of keep it.
Yeah, it's a false economy to build cheaply, and to build badly is a real false economy for across the spectrum. How do you think planning could best accommodate those principles and ideas? What would we need to do as a city to embed those ideas about effective, efficient, good design that was pleasing, better for our health, better for our well-being, better for our environment?
I think we need to be ready to have some really frank and sometimes difficult conversations, and it needs us all to be able to be at the table to work them out. If you look at just the built environment sector, you have architects, you have engineers, you have planners, you have builders and developers, and all of those people together have the knowledge and the skill to build these spaces that we need as a growing city and build them really well. But we need all of those people to be at the table, and we need our government to be there listening to say, okay, this is what we need out of this suburb. Here's the best way we can do it. Look, this is best practice. Why aren't we trying to aspire to this instead of just rolling out what we've done in the past?
So give me your vision of how Canberra looks in the 2030s. In a decade's time, if everything works really well together, if the new territory plan is terrific, if we all prioritise good design, what does the city look like ideally?
I think in my ideal world, we'll move back towards a city that actually has aspirations. We have aspirations to build strong communities. We have dreams of building a city that other countries look to as an example. And I think that means that we really start to value the space in between our built environment. So we start to value those green corridors through our city areas, through our higher density spaces, as well as in our suburbs. We've got a city that actually has a really sustainable public transport system, so that if we are going to have communities further and further out, they've got options for how they actually move around the city. And I think that we have a city that really reflects the diversity of the people that live here. I think it's astounding to me that I walk around my suburb every evening and the houses all look the same, and yet the people that I, have the joy to call neighbours all look entirely different. And so what a wonderful place it would be if our city was actually full of houses and spaces that reflected the diversity of the people who, call Canberra home.
Well, and that would be a rich, rich brew in 2030 and beyond, if we've got a diverse, exciting city full of wonderful design that makes people feel safe, happy, efficient, effective. The whole thing works beautifully together. Shannon Battison, thank you so much. Great to talk to you about this. Let's see what happens.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. I'm Genevieve Jacobs, and this is Region Media.